Now on judges. Today, the Senate reaches a major milestone as we confirm the 100th judicial nominee of the Biden administration. That's 100 judges who will bring balance and excellence to the federal bench. 100 judges who've expanded the diversity and dynamism of the judiciary. 100 judges who embody the best of our justice system, experience, fair-mindedness, and most of all, fidelity to the Constitution. Today's nominee, Gina Mendes Miro, is remarkable in her own right. Judge Mendes Miro, nominated to serve as a district judge for the District of Puerto Rico, would make history as the first openly LGBTQ member of that court. That's something to celebrate, something to be proud of, something that shows America can, little by little, live up to its promise of opportunity for all, regardless of his or her background. Judge Mendes Miro is already a deeply respected member of the Puerto Rican Court of Appeals, and I'm confident she'll make an excellent district court judge. And, Mr. President, whenever we reach a milestone like today's, it's good. It's as good an opportunity as any to pause and evaluate everything we've accomplished and what it means for our country. Today, because of the work done by this majority, our federal judiciary is far more balanced, far more diverse, far more experienced than the one we had just 2 years ago, and it's something every American can be proud of. This Senate has confirmed more judges by this point in a president's term than either of the previous two administrations. Of the 100 judges, 76 are women. 76! Today, only about 1/3 of active federal judges are women. So this is a sorely needed step in the right direction, redressing what has been a time-old imbalance. 68 of these judges are people of color, 33 black judges, 25 black women judges, 21 from Hispanic backgrounds. We confirmed the first Muslim American federal judge in U.S. history. And of course, we confirmed the first black woman ever to sit on the United States Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And diversity can take many forms. Justice Jackson, for instance, is also the first public defender to ever bear the title justice. It's no small feat to confirm the first ever justice who knows firsthand what it's like to defend the rights of the accused. And perhaps more than any other point in history, our bench has more public defenders, civil rights lawyers, election lawyers, people who have understood average folks as they walk through their lives. From Myrna Perez, who directed the Brennan Center for Voting Rights in Elections, to Holly Thomas, who led DOJ's Civil Rights Division, to Nina Morrison, the former senior litigator of the Innocence Project. These judges are the kind of heavy hitters who until now rarely made it to the federal bench. We Democrats are proud, very proud that we're changing that. Diversity is something we are all proud to celebrate, but it's not diversity on its own that matters here. If our democracy is to prosper in the 21st century, the American people must have confidence that our federal courts can faithfully adhere to the principle of equal justice under law. The more our judges reflect our nation's vibrancy and diversity, the more effective they will be in administering equal justice. The more Americans look at our courts and see people who look like them and come from their backgrounds and share similar experiences, the better off our judicial system will be. Now, that does not change the obligation of judges who have to apply the law fairly, impartially, equally. On the contrary, Mr. President, I believe diversity enhances the court's ability to rule impartially. So you can bet that we will continue in this effort. I want to thank all of my colleagues who worked so hard in the last 2 years to confirm these remarkable judges. I want to thank my Republican colleagues who worked with us as well, because their support has made this milestone possible. And of course, above all, I want to thank my colleagues on the judiciary, particularly Chairman Durbin, for his leadership in seeing these judges through the nomination process. And as a sign of what's to come, last week, Senator Durbin led the Judiciary Committee to advance another 24, that's 24 new judicial nominees. Mr. President, the Senate will keep going to confirm even more judges to the bench as quickly as we can. When we began our majority, I said judges would be one of our top priorities in this chamber, and we have kept that promise. And we're going to continue to work in the months and years ahead to ensure our courts advance the cause of equal justice under law for every single person in this country. I yield the floor. Now on implementation. As President Biden pointed out last week during his State of the Union address, the Democratic agenda is already bearing fruit across this country. There will be tens of thousands of projects funded. Last week, for instance, I joined with President Biden to talk about Gateway in New York, something New Yorkers have waited for decades and is vital to continuing the health of our bi-state New York, New Jersey economy, as well as the economy of the Northeast. When the President came and we actually started working on the project, you could feel exultation and excitement in the city. That's going to start happening again and again everywhere in urban, suburban, and rural areas, as Democrats make it a priority to get the word out about all the good things that are coming the American people's way. It's one thing for Americans to read about things that Congress has passed, but when they can actually feel and see these accomplishments play out in their communities, it makes a world of difference. We have a responsibility to make the connection between what happens in this chamber and what's going on in people's backyards. This morning, I sent out a dear colleague with Senator Stabenow about how Democrats are going to get the word out on implementing our agenda in the coming weeks. We have a great story to tell the American people and no shortage of examples of how our agenda is making the country stronger and making Americans' lives better. Let me give a few examples. Seniors on Medicare, for instance, can now already take advantage of Democrats' historic $35 a month cap on insulin. After years of hard work, this is no longer an aspiration. A $35 insulin cap is now the law of the land. Seniors who are up nights worrying how they were going to pay $400, $500, $600, $700 a month for this vital drug when you have diabetes can now breathe easy. Millions of people, the seniors and their families and friends, can breathe easier because of what we've done. Now, let's not forget, we should be expanding the cap to all Americans, not just to those over 65. And in this Congress, Democrats are going to work hard, try to work with our Republican colleagues. We hope they'll join us to make that happen. Here's another one. Very few people know of this, but we're spreading the word. Seniors on Medicaid can take advantage of free shingles vaccines. These two benefits alone, the insulin cap and free shingles vaccines, could mean hundreds in savings every year for seniors on Medicaid, and so many seniors are. On the infrastructure front, communities across the country can now apply for new grant funding to fix their roads, their bridges, their highways. These are perhaps the most obvious examples of our agenda at work. People are going to start seeing more orange vests, more hard hats, good-paying union jobs in their communities as the communities get the updates they sorely need. And the Inflation Reduction Act is already doing exactly what its name suggests, saving people money. The tax credits alone can give families as much as $14,000 for making their homes energy efficient. People can put in heat pumps, get help to get those heat pumps, and their heating bills go down. It's a great thing. The examples go on. Democrats are going to make implementation a top priority in this Congress. After everything we've been through over the past 3 years, Americans deserve to hear some good news about how their leaders are working hard for them. That's precisely what we will focus on in the coming years. Now on inflation. Yesterday, we learned that inflation slowed down for the 12th month in a row, down to 3%, 3%, the lowest that it's been in 2 years. This morning, as American families stop for gas on the way to work or check their pocketbooks or go to the supermarket, they can continue to see throughout the country that we're turning the corner. They're seeing more money in their pockets. They're seeing inflation cool down, and they're seeing wages continue to go up. Listen to this. This is important. Wage growth is now significantly above inflation for the first time since March of 2021. This is the work of the Democratic agenda in action, of President Biden's good work, lower costs for families, higher wages for workers, and millions of new jobs created. Republicans claimed that if we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, inflation would only get worse. The Republican chairman of the Ways and Means Committee claimed the Inflation Reduction Act, quote, will prolong and make worse the current inflation crisis. It's becoming clearer and clearer that they were dead wrong. In fact, since we passed the IRA, inflation has been cut by more than half on an annual basis. Let me say this again. Since we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, inflation has been cut by more than half on an annualized basis. And if that's not enough proof that the Democrats and President Biden's agenda is working, the other major pieces of legislation we passed in Congress, like the infrastructure law and the CHIPS Act, are creating millions of good-paying jobs throughout the country and in my home state of New York. Since President Biden took office, private companies have announced over $500 billion in investments across industries like semiconductors, clean energy, EVs and battery manufacturing, heavy industry. What does this mean? Jobs, 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 and more jobs. So many jobs, in fact, that some of my Republican colleagues who voted against all these bills are claiming credit for the projects and the growth that they're generating in their own states and districts. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but yesterday's report makes clear the Democratic agenda is working.
Majority Leaders recognized.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, today the Senate will continue making progress on the NDAA, one of the most important bills of the year, and something that for more than 6 decades has passed with bipartisan support. Yesterday, we adopted 2 important amendments to the NDAA, adding to the Senate's work on outcompeting the Chinese government. Both amendments, one by Senators Cornyn and Casey, one by Senators Round and Tester, passed overwhelmingly with 91 yes votes. It's not often that 91 senators can unite on a single measure, let alone 2 measures. So to see us unite on outcompeting the Chinese government was an important demonstration that this issue remains broadly bipartisan and something we'll continue working on throughout the year. This morning, we will hold another vote on an amendment by Senators Warnock and Budd, halting the harassment of our service members by debt collectors. I hope this will also enjoy broad support. And last night, we sent an outline with a number of additional amendments. I'm hopeful we can lock in an agreement soon to begin voting on some of them. Since last Wednesday, the Senate has voted on 8 amendments here on the floor, adopted 7 more by voice vote. This is how the process should work. Finally, I'll also keep working with the Republican leader, with Chair Reid and Ranking Member Wicker, on a second manager's package that will have more accomplishments both sides can embrace. And I appreciate the cooperation and good faith of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle. Mr. President, I've said repeatedly that the NDAA is an opportunity for the Senate to show we can work on the biggest issues facing our country through bipartisanship, cooperation, honest debate. That's what we've seen play out so far this year on the floor. Bipartisanship. The NDAA process in this chamber is a welcome departure from the contentious, chaotic, and partisan race to the bottom we saw in the House. And, as I have also said, if we continue embracing bipartisanship, we'll finish our work on the NDAA before the start of the August state work period. We wish to finish the NDAA as soon as we can. There is no reason for delay. We aren't quite there yet. There's still some more work to be done. But we are close. I thank my colleagues for their cooperation, and the Senate will continue working on the NDAA until the job is done. On the IRA anniversary, when we passed the Inflation Reduction Act last year, I said here on the floor that it would endure as one of the defining legislative feats of the 21st century. And just 1 year later, the IRA is paying huge dividends for the American people, for our economy, and for our environment. Republicans claimed the IRA would make inflation worse. One of our Republican colleagues claimed the IRA would cut jobs and fuel inflation. But, Mr. President, since we passed the IRA, inflation has gone not up, but down. We are lowering costs day by day for the American people with the passage of this legislation. Inflation is now half of what it was a few years ago. Across the board, costs are coming down for the American family. For the first time ever, we've made it possible for Medicare to negotiate the price of prescription drugs, helping Americans save at the pharmacy. Because of the IRA, vaccines are free for Medicare beneficiaries, and a cap on out-of-pocket drug spending. No senior will have to pay more than $2,000 a year for drugs. It's coming very soon. What a relief for people, lowering costs on one of the things that bothered them most, the high cost of prescription drugs. That's what we Democrats are doing, while over there in the House, the Republicans are just racing to the bottom. We also capped the price of insulin for seniors on Medicare to $35 a month, spurring major companies like Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk to follow suit. And millions of people who buy their health insurance on the ACA exchanges are now saving hundreds of dollars each month. Indeed, we are lowering costs. That's what we promised to do. On top of these savings, I also said the Inflation Reduction Act would kickstart the era of affordable clean energy and create countless good-paying green jobs. The Inflation Reduction Act has done just that, too. From the new wind turbine facilities in New York to solar facilities in Arizona, the IRA is paving the way for America to lead in clean energy manufacturing. 80 new clean energy manufacturing facilities have been announced across the country, employing thousands and thousands of people, and not just in junky, low-wage jobs, but in good, high-pay, high-skill jobs with training to boot. Again, these new facilities mean even more good-paying new jobs for years to come in construction, manufacturing, clean energy, and so much more. And as the new jobs are being created, wage growth continues to go up. It's now exceeding inflation. So the amount brought home in your paycheck pays more than the cost is gone up more than the cost of goods has gone up. That's a new thing. Only happened in the last few years. And the policies that we have passed here in the Senate, that Democrats have passed here in the Senate, frankly, are making a huge difference. And of course, we're only getting started. As we continue implementing the IRA, the American people will see more evidence of the Democratic agenda working for them. And on AI, finally, with so much going on in the Senate, I want to remind my colleagues, today we will hold our third all-out Senate briefing on artificial intelligence. Our presenters today are Rick Stevens from the Department of Energy's Argonne National Lab, Dr. Setharam Nathan from the National Science Foundation, and Dr. Kathleen Fisher from the Information Innovation Office at DARPA. And finally, our moderator will be Dr. Jose Marie Griffiths, Member National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence and President of Dakota State University. It's a broad range of presenters. The last few briefings were well attended. I know people are busy today, but please try to make the time. And the Q&A was surprisingly very direct, and we got a lot of answers and learned a lot. So I look forward to my colleagues at the briefing, but surely will be an illuminating and important discussion, and I thank everyone for their good work. Now on the budget. President Biden's budget won't be released until midday tomorrow, but we can already draw a couple of big conclusions about the contrast between his vision, the Democratic vision, and the Republican vision for our country. The president, for instance, is willing to do what Republicans are not, lower the deficit in a realistic, responsible way without cutting benefits that tens of millions of people rely on. In fact, Democrats have already proved it's possible. The Inflation Reduction Act not only saves families money, it also lowers the deficit by hundreds of billions of dollars. Republicans like to talk about cutting the debt, but Democrats are the ones actually getting it done. Unlike Republicans, the president is also asking the richest of the rich to pay a little more of their fair share in taxes, so that tens of millions of Americans will not see their Medicare benefits wither away in a few years. Under the president's plan, Medicare would remain solvent well beyond 2050. Isn't that great? Medicare, which we've always worried about, which is so important to tens of millions of Americans, would stay solvent till 2050. Republicans, of course, want to go the other way. Instead of cutting taxes for the middle class, their priority is tax cuts for billionaires and large corporations. Now, I have no problem with those at the very top. God bless them. They're doing just fine. But I think most Americans agree that CEOs should never have a lower tax burden than nurses, teachers, cab drivers, firefighters, police officers. If my friends on the other side want to call that outlandish or extreme, they can go right ahead. But I warn them they'll be at odds with the vast majority of Americans. Finally, the President's plan will build on what Democrats accomplished last year to lower the cost of prescription drugs. For the first time ever, Medicare now has the authority to negotiate the price of certain drugs, saving taxpayers billions of dollars. But the President is right to push further, expanding the list of drugs whose prices Medicare can negotiate. So let's run through the list one more time. The President's plan is going to continue lowering the cost of prescription drugs. He's going to ensure that Medicare remains solvent beyond 2050 without cutting a penny in benefits. He's going to ask the wealthy to pay just a little more in their fair share of taxes without raising taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. And his plan will cut the deficit by $2 trillion, $2 trillion over the next 10 years. Speaker McCarthy, what about you? Where's your plan? Enough with the dodging, enough with the excuses. It's time to level with the American people so they can see the contrast between Democrats and Republicans for themselves. On TPS. Yesterday, the Biden administration announced they will redesignate temporary protection status for Venezuela, giving migrants from that country relief from removal and the ability to work, to get work authorization. This decision will affect more than half of the newly arrived asylum seekers in New York. The administration's announcement is welcome news, and one many of us in the New York congressional delegation have been calling on for months. I wrote to Secretaries Blinken and Mayorkas in July that country conditions in Venezuela clearly met the criteria for TPS, so this is a good step forward. TPS will give much needed relief for New York systems currently straining to support newly arrived immigrants. It's going to save New York taxpayer dollars, and it will allow migrants from Venezuela who are seeking asylum to find temporary employment, support themselves and their families, contribute to our economy, and reduce the shelter burden that New York is now undergoing. So, this is very welcome news. Many of these migrants can now hopefully get closer to finding work and finding shelter, which they need. And I thank the Biden administration for taking this step. As I have said before, but still feel it deeply in my gut, no words can fully express the horror of Hamas's attack on Israel 2 Saturdays ago. In a single day, 1,300 Jews murdered in cold blood. Men, women, children, the elderly, the disabled, as old as nearly 100 years old, down to toddlers and infants. I was told that at one of the kibbutzim, Be'eri, Hamas rounded up over 100 people, from 90 years old down to little babies. They put them into the recreation room and then machine-gunned every one of them down. And now it's reported that about 200 colleagues are being held by Hamas, including Americans. I walked by the TV, they said they just showed the first hostage, a 22-year-old girl. It wrenches your stomach, how evil these people are, how evil. We Jewish people have been used to this for thousands of years. We live with it. As I mentioned, when I talked about the kibbutz, I remembered my great-grandmother. In 1941, the Nazis came into Europe and told her, she was well known because her late husband, was a famous rabbi, gather your greater family on the porch of your home. They made the 800 Jews in Chortkov go to the town square, which was near her home. And they told her 35 people gathered from 88 years old to 3 months. They said to her, "You're all coming with us." She said, "We're not moving." They machine-gunned every one of them down in front of the others. This is what we live with, and this is why we're so resolute that the threat to Hamas must be extinguished. This morning, my 4 colleagues who traveled to Israel and I will have a phone conversation with President Biden about how we can be most helpful to bring all of the hostages home safely. I promised the families we met that we would do everything we can, and we are exploring every option. The 5 of us met with the hostage families, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house watching the videos. Some of them had videos. Hamas sent some of the videos to the families. And we were just weeping together about the cruel inhumanity of Hamas and the desperation these families had to get their loved ones back. October 7th will go down as a day of inextinguishable grief, the deadliest single day for Jews since the Holocaust, a reminder of much older, darker days we must never return to. So when my colleagues and I traveled to Israel this past weekend, we delivered a simple message to the Jewish people. America will stand with Israel as an unrelenting partner. And I promised that I'll do everything possible to ensure that the United States Senate provides Israel with the support she needs to defend her people. As the highest-ranking Jewish elected official ever in America, as the first Jewish majority leader, I will do everything I can to see that that happens, as will so many of my colleagues, Jew and non-Jew alike, Democrat and Republican alike, which we so appreciate. The Senate must, above all, work quickly and swiftly to draft, consider, and pass a strong aid package for Israel as soon as we can. That includes military support, intelligence support, diplomatic help. On the military side, the Israelis have outlined to us on our trip what they needed, and we have conveyed that to the administration. And very importantly, I spoke with the president yesterday, and he said something I had been urging, that there be a significant amount of humanitarian aid to help victims and innocent Palestinians who've had nothing to do with Hamas. While I was abroad, I spoke with the Israeli leadership. Every single member we met with, we said we want to make sure you have what you need to eliminate the threat from Hamas, but we also reminded them that we must provide humanitarian assistance to those who need it, including innocent Palestinian citizens, in the fastest, safest, and most effective way possible. We're going to keep working to ensure that happens. Our reports in Israel were that Hamas was trying to block that aid in certain ways, block the highways that people drove down. Some told us that when Israeli soldiers were putting together water mains to bring water to some of the people, Hamas was shooting at them. But we must persist. We must be above the kind of evil cruelty that we saw from Hamas. We must go by the rule of law and make sure that we do everything we can to minimize the pain and loss of innocent civilians, Palestinians, and everyone else. I thank my colleagues, Senators Rosen, Kelly, Cassidy, and Romney, for joining on this bipartisan delegation. Our mission in Israel, as I said, was threefold: to send a clear message of solidarity, to assess what Israel's security needs are right now so we can put together a strong aid package and show that support for Israel is bipartisan. Standing with the Israeli government, as I mentioned, we got a list of what military assistance they need in order to fully defend themselves and eliminate the threat of Hamas. Now, tomorrow, President Biden, too, will travel to Israel to affirm, as only an American president can, that as long as there is the United States of America, Israel will never be alone. I've known President Biden when he was Senator Biden and Vice President Biden, and now President Biden. His support for Israel comes from the heart. He's a believer, and that is so good. And I know he'll deliver a strong message of support and solidarity when he comes before the Jewish people. And I know that he will reiterate, as are my colleagues and I did when meeting with each Israeli leader, the need to follow the laws of war and minimize civilian Palestinian deaths. This is very important, and civilian casualties is something we stressed strongly when we spoke to Israel leaders. Now, make no mistake, the task Israel faces is so difficult. Eliminate the threat of Hamas, hard enough. Secure the return of safe hostages safely held by these evil, vicious, horrible terrorists, cruel, and do so while minimizing the loss of innocent Palestinian lives. This is all not easy, but it's very important we make every effort to achieve all three. And as we continue working with the Biden administration to stand Israel on the world stage, the Senate has a lot to do here at home. To move on a robust aid package quickly, I'm instructing Senators Murray, Reid, and Cardin, our leading National Security Committee chairs, to work with our Republican colleagues and with the Biden administration on the details of an aid package that the Senate can take up as soon as possible, hopefully within the next few weeks. That package will include military aid, diplomatic help, humanitarian aid, and intelligence aid, all things Israel needs. With the House in disarray, the Senate will not wait to vote on an Israeli aid package. We can't wait for the House. Who knows what's going to be happening there? The Senate will go first. And it's my hope that if the Senate can move quickly and pass something with strong bipartisan support, we can importune the House to act, despite its current morass. And very soon, perhaps as soon as today, I hope the Senate can also act to pass a resolution championed by Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Risch, Leader McConnell, and myself, condemning Hamas and affirming the right that we stand with Israel in their right to defend themselves. The resolution matters because the Senate must speak in one voice against dangerous false equivalency between the evils of Hamas and the response against them. Let us not forget that Hamas does not believe in any Jewish state. If you read some of their covenants and charters, Hamas would do to the Jewish people in the rest of Israel what they did to the people along the Gaza border. Israel, therefore, not only has the right but the obligation to defend itself and its people, to eliminate the threat of Hamas so they cannot carry out an attack, a vicious, cruel, heart-wrenching attack like this ever again. And here in the Senate, we have to do our part to help them. So the next few weeks will bring a great challenge, not just for the Israeli people, but for us here in America, as we maintain our resolve to help the Israelis. The world, unfortunately, moves on quickly from tragedy. Some are already trying to move this tragedy to obscure the nature of Hamas's horror and undermine Israel's right to defend herself. But for all Israelis and for all supporters of Israel, across this country, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, Jew, Gentile, everybody, Muslim, Hindu, anybody, there cannot be any moving on from October 7th. It's going to stay here like a deep weight in our hearts. We must not allow the atrocities of Hamas to fade into obscurity. If the world shakes its head and says, well, that was yesterday, then the horrors of Hamas are going to happen again. We have an obligation to ensure it doesn't happen. I'll do everything possible to ensure the Senate acts as soon as possible. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.